Hey guys, tonight we are embarking on what you might call a culinary journey. But I want you to forget everything you know about fine dining, because we're heading back to the Golden Age of Piracy, where the food was less about flavor and more about surviving until the next port. The romantic image of pirates is all about treasure chests and epic sea battles. But the day-to-day reality was often a grim struggle against hunger, scurvy, and weevils. Your stomach, frankly, probably wouldn't make it past the first week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support truly helps this channel grow, and while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Drop a comment below and let me know. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your story begins with a smell, a thick, heady mixture of stale beer, sweat, cheap tobacco smoke, and the greasy aroma of something frying in animal fat. It's the smell of a port tavern in a place like Nassau, a chaotic, ramshackle pirate haven in the early 18th century. The room is dark, the low-beamed ceiling barely visible through a permanent haze of smoke. The only light comes from a few sputtering tallow candles and oil lanterns that cast long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn wooden walls. You're hunched over a wobbly table, a splintery bench hard beneath you. The noise is a cacophony. The drunken singing of a sea shanty in one corner clashes with a loud, angry argument in a mixture of English and Spanish in another. A group of men are slamming their tankards on a table, laughing opprobriously at a joke you can't quite hear. This is a place where lives are gambled away on a single roll of the dice and fortunes in plundered silver are spent in a single night of debauchery. They serve a woman with a weary face and a stained apron, slams a wooden bowl down in front of you. This is it, your last fresh meal on land for the foreseeable future. You peer into the bowl. It contains a murky, brown stew of some kind, with a few sad-looking root vegetables floating alongside chunks of mystery meat. Is a gotate of old chicken you decide it's better not to ask. A dense, heavy hunk of bread sits beside the bowl, its primary purpose being a vehicle to soak up the greasy liquid. You take a bite. It's salty, it's fatty, and it's hot. By the standards of this place, it's a feast. I need you to remember this taste, this moment of relative culinary luxury. This, right here, is the best it's going to get. As you eat, you watch the bartender at work. A sailor bellows an order for a flip. You watch, morbidly fascinated, as the bartender takes a pewter tankard and cracks a raw egg into it. He adds a healthy splash of dark rum, a scoop of brown sugar, and then fills it with beer. The final, bizarre step is the magic. He takes a red-hot iron poker from a small brazier of coals and plunges it into the mixture. The drink erupts in a violent hiss, frothing and steaming as the hot iron cooks the egg and caramelizes the sugar. The smell of scorched sweetness and hot alcohol cuts through the tavern's general effigy. This strange, protein-rich, and potent concoction was a sailor's favorite, a meal and a drink all in one. This tavern is the heart of the pirate ecosystem on land. It's a recruitment office, the black market, a bank, and a social club all rolled into one. A newly rich pirate might be buying rounds for the whole room, while a destitute one might be desperately looking for a berth on the next ship heading out. These places, the rough, violent, and vibrant taverns of Port Royal and the Bahamian Cays, are central to the pirate legend. But here's something historians and archaeologists often debate: the true nature of these waterfront establishments. Were they really exclusive pirate taverns, as depicted in movies, or were they just general-purpose mariners' inns, catering to anyone with coin? Be they a pirate, a merchant seaman, a Navy sailor on shore leave, or a local fisherman, the evidence suggests the latter is more likely. A tavern owner was in the business of making money, not checking resumes. Pirates were certainly a major part of the clientele, the loudest, richest, and most dangerous part, But these places were a melting pot of the entire maritime world, a microcosm of the chaotic society of the docks. A man with a magnificent black beard and a surprisingly charismatic smile approaches your table. HES, the captain of a sloop called the Sea Serpent, and HES looking for a few good hands. He sees you, a young person with nothing to lose, and makes his pitch. He doesn't promise an easy life. He promises a share of whatever you can take. He promises adventure. He promises you'll never be hungry again, a promise that is, in its own way, a terrible lie. You look down at your half-eaten bowl of greasy stew. You look at the captain, a figure of terrifying freedom and opportunity. You make your choice. You've just eaten your last meal on solid ground for a very, very long time, and you have no idea that the greasy, questionable stew you just ate will soon seem like a king's feast. The captain claps you on the shoulder, a heavy, surprisingly friendly gesture. Glad to have you aboard. He grunts, his voice a low rumble. You follow him out of the smoky tavern and into the humid night air of the tropics. The cacophony of the bar is replaced by the gentler sounds of the harbor, the lapping of water against wooden pilings, the creak of rigging from ships at anchor, and the distant cry of a night bird. The air smells of salt, tar, and something vaguely like decay. He leads you not to his grand captain's cabin, but to a quiet corner of the main deck of the Sea Serpent. A single lantern illuminates a barrel head, upon which a piece of parchment is spread. Standing there is another man, older, with a stern, watchful face. HES, not as flamboyant as the captain, but he carries an air of quiet authority. This is the quartermaster, and in many ways, he is the most important man on the ship. Before ye are truly one of us, the captain says, gesturing to the parchment, ye must agree to the articles. You lean in to look. This is the famous pirate code. It's not a myth. Almost every pirate crew operated under a similar set of rules. A contract drawn up at the beginning of a voyage and agreed to by every single crew member. It was the constitution of their floating, lawless republic, a document designed to prevent the chaos and mutiny that would otherwise be inevitable. The writing is crude, the spelling creative. It's a list of rules, a series of do's and don'ts that will govern your life. You see the expected articles: no fighting amongst the crew aboard the ship, with disputes to be settled ashore by duel. You see the rule about keeping your pistols and cutlass clean and ready for action. You see the compensation rates for losing a limb in battle: so much for a right arm, a little less for a left leg. But you notice something that speaks volumes about the priorities of life at sea. A significant portion of these articles is dedicated to one subject: food and drink. Right there, near the top, is the most important rule of all: every man shall have an equal share of the plunder, and an equal share to fresh victuals and strong liquors. Think about that. Your right to a fair portion of the daily rations is enshrined with the same legal weight as your right to a share of Spanish gold. It tells you immediately that food isn't just sustenance, it's a critical component of morale, a right so fundamental that it must be protected in writing. You read further. There's a clause stating that any man found attempting to hide or steal food from the common store would be marooned, left on a deserted island with a single flask of water and a pistol. The punishment for stealing a biscuit is as severe as the punishment for deserting your post in battle. The quartermaster points a thick finger to another line. It stipulates that if provisions run low, the crew will vote on whether to reduce the rations for everyone equally. The captain cannot simply decide to starve the crew to prolong a voyage. It is a democratic decision. This is the quartermaster's domain. While the captain is the absolute commander in the heat of a chase or a battle, in all other matters, especially the division of plunder and provisions, and the meting out of justice, the quartermaster is the crew's representative, the one who holds the captain in check. He is, in essence, your shop steward. The existence of these articles, and their surprisingly democratic nature, is one of the most well-documented facts of the Golden Age of Piracy. These men were often fleeing the brutal tyranny of the Royal Navy or the abysmal conditions on merchant ships, where the captain's word was law and the crew was often cheated, beaten, and starved. The pirate articles were a direct reaction to that, a radical experiment in workplace democracy. However, the true nature of this pirate democracy is a subject of ongoing debate among maritime historians. Were these articles always followed to the letter, or could a particularly charismatic and successful captain, the Blackbird or a Calico Jack Rackham, bend the rules through sheer force of personality and the loyalty of his core followers? Some scholars argue that the articles were a powerful and genuine expression of egalitarian ideals. Others take a more cynical view, suggesting they were simply a pragmatic tool to maintain order and prevent mutiny, and could be conveniently ignored when it suited the leadership. The truth, as always, was likely a messy compromise between the written law and the unwritten law of power and influence. You were handed a quill pen. If you can write, you sign your name. If you can't, you made your mark, a simple X. You dip the quill in the pot of ink and scratch your mark onto the parchment. It's a legally binding contract, a solemn oath. You have just signed away your old life and pledged allegiance to this wooden world and its strange, harsh laws. You have formally agreed to your share of the plunder, and, more pressingly, to your share of the food. You just have no idea how terrible that food is about to be. Your first official day as a pirate is not about hoisting the Jolly Roger or practicing your swordsmanship. It's about manual labor. The sea serpent needs to be provisioned for a long voyage, and you are part of the human chain loading the ship's larder. This is where your romantic notions about the pirate life will begin to curdle, starting with the sheer, unappetizing reality of the food you're about to call dinner for the next 6 months. The quartermaster stands on the dock, a ledger in hand, ticking off items as they are brought aboard. He is the master of the hold, the one responsible for ensuring you have enough supplies to last until you can capture more. His calculations will determine whether you eat or whether you starve. The first thing you're ordered to haul is the foundation of your entire diet. It's not a sack, but a heavy wooden barrel. You and another man struggle to roll it up the gangplank. The barrel is filled to the brim with what looks like large, thick, off-weight crackers. They are perfectly uniform, about the size of your palm, and as hard as a piece of lumber. This is it. This is hardtack, also known as ship's biscuit, sea bread, or, less charitably, Muller breakers. You pick one up. It has no smell. You knock it against the side of the ship. It makes a solid clack. This is not bread as you know it. It's a simple mixture of flour, water, and a little salt, baked multiple times until every last molecule of moisture has been evicted. Its sole virtue is its longevity. Properly stored in a dry barrel, hardtack can last for years. This particular batch might have been baked during the reign of a previous monarch. It's less a food item and more a durable, carbohydrate-based building material. Barrel after barrel of this stuff is rolled into the hold, a depressing mountain of blandness. Next comes the protein. Again, it comes in barrels. You pry one open for a look. The smell that hits you is an aggressive, eye-watering wave of pure salt. Inside, packed in a thick layer of coarse salt, are chunks of dark, reddish-brown meat. This is your salt horse or salt junk beef, or sometimes pork, that has been heavily salted and sea-aged for preservation. The meat is so thoroughly cured that it's as hard as wood. Its color unsettling light dark. Like the hardtack, it can last for an astonishingly long time. The meat you are loading might be older than you are. The salt has drawn out all the water, making it an inhospitable environment for bacteria, but also rendering it almost inedible without extensive preparation. Finally, you get to the liquids. You see a few casks of fresh water being loaded, but they are far outnumbered by an army of other barrels. These barrels contain beer, small beer, to be precise. It's a weak, low alcohol brew, not designed for getting drunk, but for staying hydrated. In an age before water purification, storing fresh water on a ship for a long voyage was a nightmare. Within weeks, the water in the casks would become slimy and foul, a teeming ecosystem of algae bacteria. Small beer, on the other hand, was relatively stable due to the alcohol content in the hops, which acted as a preservative. A sailor's daily liquid ration whilst water was beer. For a long voyage, a ship might carry thousands of gallons of it. This reliance on preserved foods wasn't unique to pirates. It was the standard for all long-distance maritime travel in the Age of Sail, including the Royal Navy and merchant fleets. The science of food preservation was in its infancy. Salting, drying, and pickling were the only reliable methods known. The revolutionary technology of canning was still a century away. Every sailor, whether a pirate or a naval ratings, was doomed to the same monotonous, unhealthy diet. But pirates had a slight advantage. Here's a small, quirky detail. They loved provision ships. While a Spanish galleon laden with silver was the ultimate prize, pirates would get almost as excited about capturing a dull, slow-moving merchant ship loaded with food. A ship carrying casks of French wine, sacks of flour from the American colonies, or wheels of Dutch cheese was a treasure trove. This ability to supplement their larder through plunder meant that pirates, on average, might have had a more varied diet than the contemporaries in the Navy, who were stuck with whatever the corrupt purser had supplied them. The historical debate around naval victualling is a fascinating one. How bad was it really? Official naval records lay out a very specific and seemingly adequate set of rations for each sailor. However, personal accounts, letters, and court-martial records paint a much grimmer picture. The pursers and contractors who supplied the Navy were notoriously corrupt, often supplying underweight barrels, rotten meat, and biscuits that were already full of weevils before the ship even left port. Some historians argue that the promise of better food was a major recruitment tool for pirates. The pirate creed of equal shares of fresh victuals was a direct response to a naval system where the crew often got the dregs. The last barrel is stowed. The hold is full. You look at the inventory of Fortress of Hardtack, a mountain of salt-encrusted meat, and a sea of weak beer. This is your fuel for the foreseeable future. There are no vegetables. There is no fruit. There is only the unholy trinity of tack, horse, and beer. The captain gives the order to cast off the lines. As the ship pulls away from the dock, you feel a sense of excitement, the thrill of adventure. But in the back of your mind, there's a gnawing realization that you're about to spend months eating food that a land dweller wouldn't feed to their dog. The first few days out of port are, in a strange way, the best of times. A spirit of optimism fills the ship. The squalor of the pirate haven is behind you. In the vast, open ocean ahead is a canvas of pure possibility. This initial optimism is mirrored in your meals. This is the fresh food phase of the voyage, a fleeting period of culinary delight that you will soon look back on with a deepened, profound sense of nostalgia. Before leaving port, the quartermaster didn't just load up on barrels of preserved misery. He also purchased as many fresh provisions as the ship's budget would allow. For the first week, maybe two if you're lucky, you get to eat real food. You see the cook emerge from his smoky galley with a bucket of potatoes and onions. He might have a few cabbages or some carrots. These are unceremoniously chopped and thrown into a massive cauldron with a few chunks of that salt beef, which hasn't yet reached its full rock-hard potential. The resulting stew, which they call lobscouse, is hot, savory, and filled with the unfamiliar texture of actual vegetables. Compared to the greasy mystery stew from the tavern, it's a gourmet experience. Even more exciting is the sound of clucking and bleating coming from a corner of the deck. Stowed away in makeshift pens are your living larderess, a handful of chickens, and maybe a couple of goats. These animals are a precious resource, providing a temporary supply of fresh eggs, milk, and eventually, meat. The chickens are the first to go. One by one, They are dispatched by the cook, plucked, and boiled. The luxury of a piece of freshly cooked chicken, however stringy and tough, is almost unimaginable after a diet of salt meat. The eggs they provide are a daily treasure, often given to the sick or injured, or perhaps fried up for the captain and his officers. The goats are even more valuable. They are surprisingly hardy sailors, able to survive on scraps and peelings. Any goat can provide a daily supply of fresh milk, a vital source of nutrients and a welcome change from beer and grog. It might be used to make a simple pudding with crushed hardtack, or just drunk straight by the lucky few who get a share. This floating farm was a common feature on ships of the era. The famous Captain Cook, on his later voyages of discovery, would become a master of maritime animal husbandry, carrying all manner of livestock to combat the nutritional deficiencies of life at sea. For your pirate crew, it's a more haphazard affair, but the principle is the same: keep fresh food alive for as long as possible. There's a small, slightly tragic detail about this fresh food phase: the ship's cat. Most ships had a cat, not as a pet, but as a vital crew member. Its job was to hunt the rats and mice that infested the vessel and threatened the precious grain stores. A good ship's cat was worth its weight in gold. However, in the most desperate of times, when all other food had run out, the line between crewmate and emergency ration could become tragically blurred. The unspoken rule was you don't eat the cat unless you absolutely have to. The duration of this honeymoon period of fresh food is a topic that interests food historians of the period. How long could a typical pirate ship maintain a supply of fresh provisions? It depended heavily on the size of the ship, the length of the intended voyage, and the wealth of the crew. A well-funded expedition might be able to stock up on enough fresh food to last a few weeks. A more desperate crew, leaving port with little money, might exhaust their fresh supplies in a matter of days. The academic debate often centers on the pirates' understanding of nutrition. Did they keep these animals and stock these vegetables simply because they tasted better? Or did they have a folk understanding that these foods kept them healthier while the scientific link between vitamin C and scurvy wouldn't be proven for decades? Experienced sailors had long known, through brutal trial and error, that something in fresh food, especially citrus and certain vegetables, staved off the dreaded disease. They might not have known the word vitamin, but they knew that a diet of only hardtack and salt meat was a death sentence. This is why capturing a ship with a cargo of oranges was sometimes more valuable than capturing a ship with a chest of silver. But all good things must come to an end. One day, you see the cook emerge from the empty chicken coop with a sad look on his face. The last goat has been milked for the final time. The last of the potatoes has been boiled. The barrel of fresh vegetables is empty. The brief, happy interlude is over. That evening, for the first time, your dinner consists of a plate of dry, hard biscuits and a single, lonely chunk of salt beef. The real voyage, the one of endurance and malnutrition, has just begun. The party is officially over. The last of the fresh food is a distant, happy memory. Now, you must face the reality of your daily bread, or rather, your daily rock. It's time for you to become intimately, painfully acquainted with the star of the maritime menu, the alpha and omega of your carbohydrate intake hardtack. The cook, a grizzled man named One-Eyed Jack for reasons that are immediately obvious. Heaves a canvas sack of the stuff onto the deck. He kicks it, and it lands with a solid, ceramic thud. He gestures for you to take your ration. You are handed two of the large, off-weight biscuits. They feel dense, heavy, and completely lifeless in your hand. Your first challenge is a simple one: how to eat it. You try to take a bite. It's a mistake. Your teeth, which are probably not in the best condition to begin with, protest violently. It's like trying to bite into a piece of fired clay. The biscuit is utterly unyielding. You see a more experienced sailor chuckle at your futile effort. He takes his biscuit, places it on the deck, and smacks it hard with the pommel of his dagger. It breaks into a few smaller, more manageable, but equally hard pieces. This is lesson number 1. Hardtack is never eaten dry if you value your dental work. The standard method of consumption is to soak it. You can drop it into your daily ration of beer or grog, letting it often into a slightly more chewable, alcohol-infused sludge. The most common way, however, is to use it as the base for a stew. The cook will smash up a large quantity of biscuits and throw them into the cauldron with water and the daily ration of salt meat to create a thick porridge-like mush called skilly gaily or lobscouse, depending on the chef's mood. It's bland, it's lumpy, but it's warm and it fills your belly. As you inspect your biscuit more closely, you notice a second, more disturbing feature. The surface is pockmarked with tiny holes, and from one of these holes, a small, black creature, like a tiny beetle, emerges and scurries away. Welcome to the second half of your hardtack experience, the weevils. These flower weevils, or their worm-like larvae, were a ubiquitous and unavoidable part of life at sea. The barrels of flour used to make the biscuits were often infested from the start, and the long storage time in the ship's warm, damp hold was a perfect breeding ground. The biscuits were often more protein-rich than the official recipe intended. Sailors had a complicated relationship with their tiny, crunchy crewmates. They were a nuisance, but they were also a fact of life. There were various techniques for dealing with them. The most common was a simple tap. A sailor would rap his biscuit sharply on the table, and the vibrations would encourage the adult weevils to scurry out. This is where the old naval toast, "To the sailors of old, may they have weevil-wide biscuits and wives that don't cheat," comes from. The weevils were a sign of a long voyage, far from home. A darker, more cynical sailor might quip, "It's the lesser of two weevils," when choosing which biscuit to eat. A more pragmatic approach was simply to eat them in the dark, in the dim light of the lower decks. You couldn't see what was in your food, so you could pretend the extra crunch was just part of the biscuit's texture. For the larvae, which were softer, you might not notice them at all if they were mixed into a stew. Some sailors even joked that the weevils were a welcome addition, providing a bit of fresh meat to an otherwise monotonous diet. The history of ship's biscuit is as long and hard as the biscuit itself. Versions of this durable bread have existed since the time of the Roman legions. It was the hearty meal, ready to eat of its day, a marvel of food preservation technology. The official naval bakeries, like the Royal Clarence Victualling Yard in Portsmouth, were massive industrial operations, churning out millions of biscuits to supply the fleet. The iconic anchor stamp on naval hardtack was a mark of official government property. The quality of these biscuits is, of course, a subject of historical debate. While the recipe was simple, the potential for corruption was high. Contractors could use old, infested, or low-quality flour. The baking process could be rushed, leaving moisture in the center of the biscuit, which would lead to mold. Archaeologists have found naval biscuits from shipwrecks that are perfectly preserved after centuries under the sea, a testament to their durability. But they have also found records of entire shipments being condemned as unfit for human consumption before a voyage even began. Pirates, by plundering their own supplies, had the small advantage of being able to personally inspect the quality of the biscuits they acquired. You look down at the grayish mush in your bowl. It's your dinner. It's mostly boiled, crushed hardtack, with a few stringy bits of salt meat and, if you're being honest with yourself, probably an unzara number of cooked weevils. You are so hungry that you eat it without complaint. You are learning the first great lesson of the pirate diet. You don't have to like it. You just have to eat it to survive. The humble, indestructible, and often inhabited hardtack is now your staff of life. Now that you've come to terms with the bread situation, it's time to address the main course. For the next several months, your primary source of protein will come from the barrel, and it will be a constant battle for both your teeth and your stomach. You are about to be formally introduced to salt horse. The name is brutally descriptive. The meat, usually beef but sometimes pork, has been so heavily salted and cured for so long that it has the color and texture of old leather and the hardness of a piece of wood. It's called horse. There's a bit of gallows humor, a commentary on its toughness and questionable origins. The sailors would joke that it was the remains of the horses that brought the supplies to the docks. The cook's daily ritual begins with this formidable substance. He and his mate will use a block and tackle to hoist a massive chunk of the stuff out of its briny, salt-encrusted barrel. The piece of meat is so dense it has to be cut with a saw, not a knife. Your portion is a small, hard, brick-like rectangle of dark, unappetizing flesh. Eating it in this state is impossible. It is a rock of salt and desiccated protein. The first and most crucial step is desalination. The chunk of meat is tied to a rope and tossed overboard, to be dragged behind the ship for several hours. This is intended to let the ocean water wash away the excess surface salt. It's a slightly flawed plan, given that you are dragging it through more salt water, but the a little less salty sea is still less salty than the pure brine of the barrel. It also has the added effect of tenderizing the meat by slamming it against the hull and feeding some of the small fish. After its bath, the meat is hauled back on board. It is still incredibly tough and salty. Now, it must be boiled, and boiled, and boiled. For hours, the great cauldron in the galley will be filled with water and the day's ration of salt horse, and it will simmer all day. The goal is to rehydrate the meat and boil out as much of the remaining salt as possible, making it soft enough to chew. When it's finally served, often as part of the lobscouse or skilly gaily with the crushed hardtack, the meat is a pale, stringy, and profoundly disappointing substance. The flavor is a one-note song of overwhelming saltness, with a faint, ghostly memory of what might once have been beef. The texture is fibrous and chewy. You will spend a good 5 minutes working each mouthful into a state where it can be safely swallowed. The sailors, in their infinite capacity for grim humor, had many uses for salt horse beyond eating. The tougher, more unmanageable pieces were carved. Men would pass the long hours of their watch by taking a piece of salt beef and a knife and carving it into intricate shapes, like a snuff box or the handle of a tool. Once dried, the meat was so hard and durable, it was like a piece of dark-grained wood. It's a testament to the inedibility of a food when its primary use becomes arts and crafts. Here's a small, stomach-churning detail about the barrels themselves. The brine in the barrel, a thick, salty, and often rust-colored sludge, was known as slush. It was considered a perquisite of the cook. He would collect this greasy, saline slime and sell it to tallow chandlers in port, who would use it to make candles or soap. This slush fund was a vital part of the cook's income, so the very substance that your food was packed in was someone else's greasy payday. The quality of this salt meat was a constant source of misery and a frequent cause of disputes on naval and merchant ships. The system was rife with corruption. Contractors would use the cheapest, oldest, and lowest quality meat they could find. They would pack the barrels with more salt than meat to save money. There are horrific accounts of crews opening a barrel only to find the contents were rotten, green with decay, or even that the contractor had put stones in the bottom of the barrel to make it weigh the correct amount. This is another area where pirates had a distinct advantage, which historians often highlight. By capturing their own supply ships, they could bypass the corrupt victualling system entirely. When a pirate crew took a prize, they would inspect the provisions with a critical eye. A ship with barrels of high-quality Irish beef or fine Virginia hams was a cause for major celebration. While their own stores might be grim, the possibility of capturing better ones provided a constant hope for a decent meal. The debate continues on how much this better food narrative was a genuine recruiting tool versus a romanticized myth, but the structural possibility for a better diet was undeniably there for pirates in a way it wasn't for a Navy sailor. You stare into your bowl at the stringy, tail fibers of the boiled salt horse. It's your third week of eating this. and you already feel like your tongue has been permanently pickled. Every meal is the same salty, chewy ordeal. You are consuming just enough protein to stay alive, but deriving zero pleasure from the act. You chew, and you chew, and you swallow, all while dreaming of the impossible luxury of a single, fresh, unsalted steak. You've managed to choke down your salty, stringy dinner. Now, you're thirsty. A profound, throat-piercing thirst that the salt-heavy meal has only intensified. You stumble over to the scuttle, but the large, covered cask of water kept on deck for the crew to drink from. A shipmate, seeing your intention, stops you with a hand on your chest and a shake of his head. You don't want to be drinking that. Mate, he says, his face wrinkled in disgust. He gestures for you to look inside. You lift the lid. The water is brackish, with a greenish, slimy film on the surface. A cloud of tiny, swimming things algae, larvae, and other microscopic horrors is clearly visible in the lukewarm liquid. And the smell, it's a foul, stagnant stench of decay. This is what happens to fresh water stored in a wooden barrel for weeks in the tropical heat. It becomes a living, breathing, and profoundly undrinkable primordial soup. So, how do you stay hydrated? The answer lies in the other barrels you loaded, the ones filled with alcohol. Your daily ration of liquid is not water. It's a choice between two much safer, if not exactly healthier, options. The first, and most common, is beer. As you learn it, the small beer carried on ships was a weak, no alcohol brew. The brewing process killed off most of the harmful bacteria, and the hops and alcohol acted as preservatives, keeping it relatively stable and safe to drink long after the fresh water had turned into a swamp. Your daily ration might be as much as a gallon per person. It was less a beverage and more a liquid necessity, the primary means of hydration for the entire crew. It was watery. It was probably a bit sour, but it wouldn't kill you. The second option, particularly beloved by pirates and the Royal Navy in the Caribbean, was rum. The high sugar content of the West Indies made rum cheap, plentiful, and potent. A ship might carry huge quantities of it, either as part of its standard provisions or, in the case of a pirate ship, liberated from a captured merchant vessel. Drinking straight all day, however, was a recipe for a permanently drunken, dysfunctional crew. So a clever solution was devised, famously attributed to the British Admiral Edward Vernon, whose nickname was Old Grog because of the girogram cloak he wore. He ordered that the sailors' daily rum ration be diluted with water. This new concoction was, of course, named grog. The standard recipe for grog was 1 part rum to 4 parts water. This did two things. It cut the potency of the alcohol, making it harder for the crew to get debilitating light drunk, and it made the foul-tasting water more palatable. The rum disguised the swampy taste of the water, and the water stretched out the rum supply. To this basic mixture, a little lime or lemon juice was often added for reasons we'll get to later, along with a spoonful of brown sugar to make it taste better. This daily grog ration became an institution, a ritual looked forward to by every sailor. The call to grog was a highlight of the day. The crew would line up with their tankards or cups, and the cook's mate would ladle out their prescribed share. It was a moment of communal relaxation, a brief respite from the toil and boredom of the day. Here's a small detail that speaks to the importance of this ration of spirits. In the Royal Navy, the tradition of the daily rum ration lasted for over 300 years, only being abolished in 1970. The day it ended, July 31st, 1970, is still known in naval circles as Black Tot Day, a day of mourning for a lost tradition. It shows how deeply ingrained this alcoholic ritual was in the culture of life at sea. Of course, the pirates' relationship with alcohol is a subject of much historical discussion and romantic exaggeration. The stereotype is of pirates constantly swigging from bottles of rum, perpetually drunk and belligerent. While there were certainly epic binges important after a successful capture, life on the ship required a level of sobriety and discipline. A drunk lookout or a hungover helmsman could endanger the entire vessel. The pirate articles often contained strict rules about drinking. Some codes forbade drinking after a certain hour, while others gave the quartermaster the authority to cut off the rum ration if the crew was becoming unruly. The debate among historians often focuses on whether pirates were, on average, drunker than their naval counterparts. Some argue that the democratic nature of a pirate's ship and the lack of a rigid command structure could lead to more indiscipline and heavier drinking. Others contend that since a pirate ship's survival depended on the skill and readiness of its crew, they had a vested self-interest in maintaining a functional level of sobriety, at least while at sea. The truth is, it likely varied wildly from one crew to another, depending entirely on the personality of the captain and the discipline of the men. You take your cup and join the line for your daily ration. You choose the grog. It's warm, sweet, and tawdry. The harshness of the rum and the slim-inness of the water both mellowed into a surprisingly drinkable mixture. It's not refreshing. It doesn't quench your thirst in the way a cool glass of water would. But it's wet, it's safe, and it provides a momentary, pleasant buzz. You are drinking not for pleasure, but for survival, finding your hydration at the bottom of a cup of diluted rum. In the center of this floating world of hunger and thirst is one man who holds the key to your daily happiness, or more accurately, your daily level of misery. He is the ship's cook. On a pirate ship, he was often known by the slightly more dignified title of artist, a deeply ironic name for a man whose medium was salt beef and whose canvas was a tin plate. Forget the image of a jolly, plump chef. The sea cook of the Golden Age was rarely a culinary professional. The job was often given to a sailor who had been maimed in a previous engagement. A man who had lost a leg or an arm was no longer useful for climbing the rigging or wielding a cutlass in a fight, but if he could stand, stir a pot, and chop an onion, he could be the cook. The most famous fictional pirate of all, Long John Silver, was a ship's cook, his missing-legged estimate to a long and violent career. This was a form of early workers' compensation. The crew took care of its own by giving the wounded a job they could still perform. The cook's authority on the ship was peculiar. He had no real command, yet his influence was immense. A good cook, one who could take the grim trio of hardtack, salt meat, and stagnant water and turn it into something vaguely edible, was a treasured member of the crew. He knew the tricks of the trade: how long to soak the beef, how to use a bit of captured spice to mask the taste of rot, how to turn crushed biscuits and goat's milk into a passable pudding. A skilled cook could raise morale and make the grim realities of the diet almost bearable. A bad cook, on the other hand, could make life a living hell. A lazy or incompetent cook would serve up beef that was still tough as leather and salty enough to make your eyes water. H.E.D. burn the skilly gaily, adding the delightful flavor of charcoal to the already bland mush. H.E.D. be careless with the rations, wasting precious food on a ship where the quality of the food was one of the few comforts available. A bad cook could find himself very, very unpopular, a dangerous position on a vessel full of armed and perpetually hungry men. The cook was also the guardian of the ship's most vital resource after the liquor, the fat. Any fat that was rendered from boiling the salt pork or beef was carefully skimmed off and stored. This slush, or grease, was a valuable commodity. It was used for waterproofing leather, lubricating parts of the rigging, and as a base for primitive medicines. But most importantly, it was a source of extra calories and flavor. The cook might use a dollop of grease to fry up some crushed hardtack, creating a dish called kush, a greasy, salty, and incredibly satisfying treat for men starved of fat. Here's a small, weird detail about the cook's duties: he was sometimes also the ship's surgeon. In the absence of a dedicated medical officer, the cook was often the one who had to perform rough and ready battlefield medicine. It made a certain grim sense. He had a strong stomach, he was good with a knife, and his galley fire was the only place to heat the tools needed for cauterizing a wound. The same hands that butchered a chicken in the morning might be amputating a sailor's leg in the afternoon. It's a terrifying overlap of professions that speaks to the brutal pragmatism of life at sea. The exact status of the cook on a pirate vessel is a topic of some historical interest. On a naval ship, the cook was a low-ranking member of the crew, but on a pirate ship, did his vital role grant him more respect or a larger share of the plunder? The surviving pirate articles are mostly silent on this. Some sources suggest the cook received a full share, same as any other fighting man. Others imply that, as a non-combatant, he might have received a slightly smaller share, perhaps a share and a half, with other non-fighting members like the ship's carpenter or musician. This debate ties into the larger question of labor and value on a pirate ship. Was value determined purely by one's fighting ability, or did the crew recognize the essential contribution of skilled craftsmen and support staff? The fact that the cook's role was seen as a respectable position for a wounded veteran suggests that pirates had a more holistic and pragmatic view of a man's worth than the strictly hierarchical naval system. You watch as One-Eye Jack stirs the great, bubbling cauldron. His face is a permanent grimace, edged by sun, sea, and probably the constant, overwhelming smell of boiling salt meat. He is the alchemist of your daily diet, the magician tasked with turning misery into sustenance. Your opinion of him will swing wildly from day to day, from gratitude for well-mates to cursing his name for a burnt biscuit. He is not the captain of the ship, but he is the undisputed king of the galley, the ruler of your stomach, then the man who, more than any other, determines the flavor of your survival. You follow the cook, One-Eye Jack, as he carries a bucket of water towards his domain. You're about to enter the heart of the ship's culinary operations, the place where sustenance is forged. This is the galley, and it is, without a doubt, the most dangerous, cramped, and unpleasant corner of the entire vessel. Forget any notion of a spacious, well-lit kitchen. The ship's galley, often called the caboose or camboose, is a tiny, claustrophobic space. On many ships, it wasn't even a proper room below decks. It was a simple brick and iron fire box located on the main deck, sometimes partially sheltered by a small shed, but often open to the elements. The centerpiece of this space is the hearth. It's a shallow brick structure, filled with sand, upon which the fire is built. This sand layer is a crucial safety feature, designed to insulate the wooden deck below from the intense heat of the fire. Above the hearth, suspended from a heavy iron bar, hangs the ship's most important piece of cookware, a gigantic copper cauldron. This single pot is where almost every hot meal is made: the lobscouse, the scurvy, the endless boiled beef. The inside of the copper is supposed to be lined with tin to prevent the acidic foods from reacting with the copper and creating poisonous verdures. A careless cook who let the tin lining wear away could accidentally poison the entire crew. The whole setup is a floating fire hazard. You have an open fire, burning just a few feet away from tarred ropes, wooden masts, and canvas sails. A stray spark, carried by a sudden gust of wind, could set the rigging ablaze in seconds. Even more terrifying is the ship's magazine, where the gunpowder is stored, which is often located perilously close to the galley area. Cooking at sea was a constant, nerve-wracking exercise in fire management. In heavy weather, the danger escalates dramatically. When the ship is pitching and rolling in a storm, the cook's job becomes a death-defying circus act. He has to tend the fire while bracing himself against the violent motion of the deck. The massive cauldron, filled with gallons of boiling water or hot stew, swings wildly on its chain like a giant pendulum of scalding death. A sudden lurch of the ship could send the contents of the pot sloshing onto the cook, causing horrific burns. For this reason, in very bad weather, the fire was often extinguished, and the crew would have to make do with a cold meal of dry hardtack and cooked salt meat. The galley is also a vortex of smoke, with no proper chimney, just a simple hood that offers minimal ventilation. The smoke from the wood or charcoal fire has nowhere to go. It billows out across the deck, stinging the eyes and choking the lungs of anyone working nearby. The cook and his mates live in a perpetual, greasy, smoke-filled haze. Their clothes are permanently stained with soot, and their lungs are likely as black as the inside of the hearth. Here's a small, greasy detail about the galley, the slush barrel. This was the cask where the cook stored all the rendered fat he skimmed from the boiling meat. It was a prized possession, but also an incredible fire accelerant. A fire in the galley that reached the slush barrel would result in a spectacular, undoubtedly catastrophic grease fire, the kind that is almost impossible to extinguish. The design and safety of the ship's galley is a key topic for naval architects and historians. They study the evolution of the galley from a simple, dangerous firebox on the deck to the more sophisticated iron stoves that were eventually developed in the 19th century. These later stoves, with their enclosed fireboxes and proper chimneys, represented a quantum leap in safety and efficiency. One of the ongoing debates is about the fuel source. What were they burning in these hearths? Wood. Wood was the most common fuel, but it was bulky and took up a lot of precious space in the hold. A long voyage required a huge amount of firewood. Some sources suggest that charcoal was also used, as it burns hotter and produces less smoke. On very long voyages, when the wood ran out, the cook might have to resort to burning the empty barrels that once held the food. A grim act of cannibalizing the ship's own infrastructure to cook the last of the rations. The logistics of simply keeping the fire lit for months on end was a major challenge in itself. You stand at a safe distance, watching One-Eyed Jack at work in his smoky kingdom. He moves with a practiced, economical grace, seemingly oblivious to the smoke, the heat, and the danger. He is the master of this tiny, hazardous domain. He knows its quirks, its dangers, and its secrets. The galley is a microcosm of life at sea, a place of constant risk, discomfort, and ingenuity, where the simple act of preparing a meal is a daily battle against the elements and a flirtation with disaster. Weeks have turned into a month, and the ship has been unlucky. You haven't spotted a single prize, no slow-moving merchantman to relieve of its cargo. The mood on board is growing sour, and so is the food situation. The barrels are getting lighter. The once mighty mountain of hardtack in the hold is now a modest hill. This is when the quartermaster's other, less pleasant, job comes to the forefront: rationing. The democratic promise of equal shares that you signed up for is about to be tested. The quartermaster, after a conference with the captain and devote by the crew, announces that daily rations are being cut. Your 2 biscuits a day are now 1.5. The portion of salt beef, already meager, is now even smaller. The daily grog ration is watered down a little more. It's a necessary measure to stretch the remaining supplies, but it does nothing for morale. Now a new feeling enters your life, one that will be your constant companion in gnawing, low-grade hunger. You are getting enough calories to function, to climb the rigging and man your post, but you are never, ever full. Your stomach feels permanently hollow. Every meal leaves you wanting more. You start to fantasize about food, not about feasts, but about the simple luxury of a second biscuit or an extra spoonful of skilly gaily. This constant hunger sharpens the senses and shortens the temper. You start watching your crewmates with a new, suspicious eye. Is that man taking a slightly larger piece of meat? Did the cook's mate give his friend an extra ladle to the smallest perceived inequity can become a source of intense resentment. Fights break out over imagined slights, a dropped piece of bread, or an accusation of hoarding. The quartermaster now becomes the most powerful man on the ship. He, along with his mates, oversees the distribution of every single meal with an iron fist. He weighs the rations. He measures the rum. His word is law, and he is constantly on the lookout for the greatest crime a man can commit on a hungry ship: stealing food. The temptation is immense. A man working in the hold at night, surrounded by barrels of biscuits, might think he can slip one into his shirt without anyone noticing. But the quartermaster has eyes everywhere. The penalty for being caught is swift and brutal, as laid out in the articles you signed. The most famous punishment is marooning. The thief would be put ashore on a deserted island or an uninhabited stretch of coast. He would be left with nothing but the clothes on his back, a flask of water, a cutlass to fend for himself, and a single pistol, loaded with one shot. This single shot was not for hunting. It was a final, grim courtesy, an invitation to take his own life rather than face the slow, agonizing death of starvation or thirst. It's a punishment that perfectly fits the crime. You tried to steal the crew's sustenance, so now you must face true, absolute hunger on your own. Another, quicker punishment was flogging. The thief would be tied to the mast or grating, and the crew would take turns lashing his bare back with a cat-o'-nine-tails. It was a brutal and humiliating ritual, designed as a powerful deterrent. Here's a small, legalistic detail about pirate justice. The trial was often a formal affair. The accused would be brought before the quartermaster and a jury of his fellow crewmen. He would be allowed to speak in his own defense. Witnesses would be called. It was a crude form of a courtroom drama, played out on the main deck. This gave the punishment a veneer of legitimacy. It wasn't just the captain's whim, it was the will of the crew, enforcing the laws they had all agreed to. The severity of these punishments is a topic of great interest to legal historians who study pirate codes. Was the enforcement of these rules as draconian, as the articles themselves suggest? Some historical accounts describe maroonings and floggings in vivid detail, confirming that these punishments were very real. However, other accounts suggest a degree of pragmatism. On a ship that was already short-handed, losing another crewman to marooning or disabling him through a severe flogging might not be in the crew's best interest. The debate often revolves around whether the threat of the punishment was more important than the punishment itself. The written code needed to be terrifyingly strict to deter theft in the first place. In practice, a captain or quartermaster might have opted for a less severe punishment warning, a less brutal flogging, or a period of humiliating extra duties, especially if the thief was a valuable and otherwise skilled sailor. The enforcement of the law was likely a flexible balance between the letter of the code and the practical needs of the ship. You chew your 1.5 biscuits slowly, trying to make them last. The hunger is a constant ache in your belly. You watch the quartermaster, his face a stern mask of authority. Then you understand his role completely now. He is not just the keeper of the food, he is the keeper of the peace. His strict, impartial rationing is the only thing that stands between the crew and a descent into a war of all against all, where the only law would be that of the sharpest knife in the quickest hand. Your hunger is a small price to pay for that fragile order. The gnawing hunger in your belly has become a permanent part of your existence. It's a dull, constant ache you've almost gotten used to. The new, more sinister feeling is creeping into your body. It's not the sharp pain of an empty stomach, but a deep, profound weariness, a lethargy that settles in your bones and cannot be shaken by sleep or rest. A new and deeply unpleasant chapter of your maritime education is beginning. The scourge of scurvy. It starts subtly, your joints ache, climbing the rigging, a task that once required only strength, now feels like an act of monumental effort. Your muscles feel weak and watery. You are tired, not just physically, but existentially. Then, the more obvious symptoms begin to appear. One morning, while gnawing on your morning biscuit, you feel a strange tenderness in your mouth. You run your tongue over your gums. They feel soft and swollen, like a piece of overripe fruit. A few days later, they begin to bleed. A thin, metallic taste of blood is now a constant companion to the saltness of your food. Next come the marks, strange, dark blotches, like deep purple bruises, begin to appear on your legs and arms, seemingly from nowhere. An old scar on your arm from a childhood accident begins to ache, the skin around it turning a dark, unhealthy color. In the most terrifying cases, you see men whose old wounds, healed for years, have begun to spontaneously reopen, their bodies literally coming undone. Your body is like a poorly built ship in a storm. Its very rivets and caulking beginning to fail. Your teeth feel loose in their sockets. Your breath takes on a foul, odd odor. You are not alone. You look around at your crewmates and see the same signs of decay. Men who were strong and boisterous a month ago are now listless, hollow-eyed shadows. Their skin sallow, their movements slow and painful. They are irritable and deeply depressed. Scurvy is not just a physical disease, it is a profound psychological decay. The feeling of your own body betraying you from the inside out. This is the reality of a long voyage on a diet devoid of vitamin C. Your body needs a ascorbic acid to produce collagen, the glue that holds your tissues, your blood vessels, and your skin together. Without it, you literally start to fall apart. The pirates and sailors of this age had no concept of vitamins. They attributed the disease to all sorts of things: bad air, dampness, or the will of God. They did, however, know through brutal, empirical evidence that something in fresh food could prevent or cure it. Experienced sailors knew that a stop at a tropical island to gorge on fresh fruit and greens could work a miraculous recovery. Men who were on the brink of death could be up and walking again in a matter of days after eating oranges or limes. This is why capturing a Spanish ship with a cargo of citrus from the New World was a jackpot. The crew might drink a toast to the gold, but they would devour the fruit as if it were the elixir of life itself, because for them, it was. The desperate, pre-scientific cures for scurvy were as varied as they were bizarre. One of the strangest was the earth bath. A sailor in the advanced stages of scurvy would be taken ashore and literally buried up to his neck in the soil, the idea being that the wholesome vapors of the earth would be absorbed into his body and drive out the disease. It did not work. Another supposed remedy was the elixir of vitriol, a fancy name for sulfuric acid diluted in water, which, as you can imagine, was also spectacularly ineffective and probably did more harm than good. The history of scurvy is a long and tragic tale, and the central academic debate revolves around the question if experienced sailors knew that citrus fruits were a cure. Why did it take so long for institutions like the Royal Navy to make them a standard part of the rations? The British naval surgeon James Lind famously conducted a controlled experiment in 1747, just after the Golden Age of Piracy ended, which proved that citrus was the cure. Yet, it took the Admiralty another 50 years to officially issue lemon juice to the fleet. Some historians blame institutional inertia and bureaucratic incompetence. Others point to the cost and difficulty of preserving citrus juice on a large scale. A more subtle argument is that the medical establishment of the time was resistant to a simple folk remedy. They were searching for a complex cure based on the prevailing theories of medicine and were reluctant to accept that the answer was as simple as eating an orange. The pirates, unburdened by institutional dogma and driven by pure survival, were often quicker to adopt the practical solution. You look at your own swollen gums and the dark bruises on your legs. The hunger in your belly is nothing compared to this deep, systemic rot. You are no longer just dreaming of a good meal. You are dreaming of an orange, a lemon, a handful of green leaves, anything to stop your own body from slowly, inexorably falling apart. The specter of scurvy now haunts every man on the ship. The lethargy, the bleeding gums, the dark blotches, it's a shared misery that has settled over the crew like a damp, foul-smelling blanket. But as you're about to discover, scurvy didn't travel alone. It had a whole host of awful, debilitating cousins, other nutritional deficiency diseases that preyed on the sailors whose diets were a monotonous landscape of preserved foods. Life at sea was a masterclass in malnutrition, and you're about to get a full education. Day crewmate, a weary man from the East Indies, has been acting strangely. He seems confused, his memory failing him. He stumbles when he walks, his legs seemingly unable to support him. He complains of a pins and needles sensation in his hands and feet. This isn't scurvy. This is likely beriberi, a disease caused by a deficiency of thiamine, or vitamin bone. Thiamine is crucial for nerve function and metabolizing carbohydrates. It's found in whole grains, but the process of milling flour to make it whitened more shelf-stable often removes the thiamine-rich German bran. The hardtack you've been eating, made from highly processed flour, is a nutritional void, providing calories but little else. The man's diet, rich in these empty carbohydrates and lacking in fresh meat or whole grains, has starved his nerves of the vitamin they need to function. If left untreated, his confusion will worsen, his muscles will waste away, and he will eventually suffer heart failure. Then, there's another man, a former fisherman from the coast of Spain. His ailment is different, and in some ways, even more disturbing. His skin has become rough and inflamed wherever it's exposed to the sun. A painful, cracking dermatitis that looks like a severe sunburn that never heals. He suffers from debilitating diarrhea, and his moods swing wildly from deep depression to aggressive dementia. The crew whispers that he has gone mad. He has pellagra. Pellagra is caused by a deficiency of niacin, or vitamin B3. It's often associated with diets that rely heavily on a single, unprocessed grain like corn, which can inhibit niacin absorption. While corn was a staple on your ship, a severely limited diet of any kind can trigger it. The disease is known as the 4E's dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, and, if left untreated, death. It's a cruel illness that attacks the skin, the gut, and the mind simultaneously. These diseases weren't just a problem for pirates. They were a global scourge, deeply tied to food production and social class. Pellagra, for instance, became epidemic in the American South in the 19th and early 20th centuries among poor sharecroppers whose diet consisted of little more than corn, molasses, and fatback. Berry became a massive problem in Asia with the rise of steam-powered rice mills, which polished the nutrient-rich brown rice into fashionable, but nutritionally empty white rice. Your pirate ship is a floating microcosm of these global nutritional crises. Here's a small, slightly ironic detail about these diseases, the officer's advantage. Sometimes, the captain and his officers had a slightly better diet. They might have had their own small, private stock of wine, cheese, or preserved fruits. This small nutritional advantage could sometimes be the difference between sickness and health. On a naval ship, the class divide was even starker. However, on a pirate ship, with its ethos of equal shares, the nutritional playing field was often flatter. The captain might be suffering from the same bleeding gums and aching joints as the lowest cabin boy. In this, at least, there was a grim form of equality. The historical study of these diseases at sea is a fascinating and often difficult field. It's hard to diagnose a specific vitamin deficiency from a 300-year-old ship's log or a sailor's letter home. The symptoms were often complex and overlapping. A man might have been suffering from scurvy, diarrhea, and a host of other issues all at once. The sailors themselves didn't have the language to describe their ailments precisely, they just knew they were sick, tired, and in pain. One of the great academic debates is what historians call the synergistic effect of malnutrition. Scurvy wasn't just a vitamin C problem. A body weakened by scurvy was far more susceptible to other infections and diseases. A simple cold could turn into fatal pneumonia. A minor cut could become a raging, gangrenous infection. The lack of proper nutrition didn't just cause specific diseases, it caused a total collapse of the body's ability to defend and repair itself. The official cause of death might be listed as fever, but the underlying cause was a catastrophic failure of the entire system, brought on by months of eating terrible food. You look at the stumbling man with the failing memory and the madman with the ravaged skin. You look at your own crewmates, their bodies marked by the telltale signs of scurvy. The ship is no longer just a vessel, it's a floating hospital ward. a laboratory of nutritional horror. You realize that the greatest threats you face are not cannons or storms. They are the invisible enemies, the deficiencies that are silently, systematically dismantling your crew from the inside out, one vitamin at a time. The ship is a ghost of its former self. The crew is listless, weakened by hunger and the alphabet of diseases that have taken hold. The hold is nearly empty, the mood grim. In this state of desperation, the captain turns to the last available resource, the ocean itself. An order is given. The ship is to be becalmed, the sails lowered, and every available line and hook is to be put in the water. You are going fishing. This is not a relaxing weekend hobby. This is a desperate, full-time scramble for calories. You and the other able-bodied men line the rails of the ship, dropping baited hooks into the deep blue water. The bait itself is a testament to your dire straits, a piece of cloth smeared with the cook's precious grease, or a chunk of salt pork so tough and old that even a shark might think twice. For hours, you wait under the blistering tropical sun, your line limp in the water. The ocean, which seemed so full of life, is maddeningly empty. But then, a shout goes up. A man is struggling with his line, his face a mask of concentration. The crew rushes to help him. They haul and pull. Then finally, a large, silvery fish is flopped onto the deck. It's a tuna or a mahi-mahi. A cheer goes up, a weak but genuine sound of triumph. The cook descends on the fish like a vulture. Within minutes, it is scaled, gutted, and chopped into steaks. The fire in the galley, which has been cold for days, is brought back to life. Soon, the smell of grilling fish wafts across the deck, a smell so delicious, so full of life and promise, that it almost makes you weep. That evening, you are served a piece of fresh, flaky, perfectly cooked fish. It is the most exquisite thing you have ever tasted. The flavor is a revelation, a shock to a palate accustomed only to salt and rot. But one fish is not enough for a whole crew. The fishing continues. Sometimes you get lucky, pulling in a haul of smaller fish. Other times, you catch something truly strange. A sailor might pull up an ugly, spiny scorpion knifus, and the crew will debate whether it's more poisonous than it is nutritious. You might catch a squid, its tentacles writhing on the deck, and the cook will chop it up and fry it into tough, chewy rings. Then there is the greatest prize of all, a creature that was a cornerstone of the desperate mariner's diet, the sea turtle. If the lookout spots a giant green sea turtle floating on the surface, sunning itself, the entire ship would mobilize. A longboat would be quietly lowered into the water, and a team would row out to sneak up on the unsuspecting reptile. Their goal was to flip it onto its back, rendering it helpless, and then haul the massive, struggling creature back to the ship. A large sea turtle was a walking pantry. It could be kept alive on its back on the deck for weeks, providing a continuous supply of fresh meat and eggs. The meat was said to have several different flavors, depending on which part of the turtle it came from, tasting like beef, chicken, or fish. The blood was drunk to quench thirst, then the fat was rendered for cooking. It was a brutal, ugly business, but a single turtle could mean the difference between starvation and survival. Here's a small, weird detail about this desperate foraging eating your own ship. As the voyage wore on, the ship itself could become a source of food. The barnacles and other shellfish that grew on the ship's hull could be scraped off and boiled into a gritty, fishy soup. In the most extreme of circumstances, the sailors might start to eat the rats that infested the ship. A common method was to hunt them at night with a club, or to fry a piece of greasy bacon near a rat hole, and then snatch the rat when it came out to investigate. It was a grim harvest, but a source of fresh protein nonetheless. The historical study of what pirates and sailors ate from the sea is pieced together from various sources. The ship's logs sometimes mention catching a turtle or a great store of fish. Archaeologists examining pirate shipwrecks, like Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge, find the remains of fish bones and turtle shells amidst the cannons and gold dust, providing direct physical evidence of their diet. One of the academic debates is how much these foods of opportunity could really supplement the standard rations. Could a crew truly survive for an extended period by fishing? The answer is likely no. Fishing in the deep ocean is an unreliable hit or miss affair. While a lucky catch could provide a welcome reprieve, it couldn't be counted on as a steady source of food. These desperate fishing trips were a temporary stopgap, a way to stave off the inevitable for a few more days, not a sustainable solution. The sea was a source of occasional bounty, but more often it was a vast, empty desert. You look down at your empty plate, the taste of fresh fish still lingering on your tongue. The brief moment of joy is already fading, replaced by the familiar, gnawing hunger. The fishing lines are back in the water. The hunt for the next meal has already begun. You stare out at the endless blue, wondering what other strange and possibly terrible things the ocean will offer up before your journey is through. Your luck has finally turned. The lookout spots a smudge of green on the horizon. Land, not a civilized port, but a small, deserted-looking island. A dot of green in the vast blue of the Caribbean. For the captain, this is a chance to take on fresh water. For the crew, it is a chance to escape the wooden prison of the ship and, more importantly, a chance to find anything, fresh to eat. The show party is organized, and you are part of it. As the longboat grounds on a white, sandy beach, you leap out, the feeling of solid, unmoving ground beneath your feet a strange and wonderful sensation. The island is a riot of life. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and flowers. The sound of strange birds and insects is a deafening chorus compared to the monotonous sounds of the ship. Your mission is simple: forage. You and your crewmates spread out into the dense, humid jungle, armed with cutlasses and canvas sacks. You are on a treasure hunt, but the treasure you seek is not gold, it is edible. Every plant, every tree, every vine is a potential meal. But this is a dangerous game of culinary roulette. You see a tree laden with a familiar-looking fruit, coconuts. This is a jackpot. A few of the more agile sailors shimmy up the tall trunks to throw the green nuts down. You smash one open on a rock. The sweet, refreshing coconut water is the most delicious thing you've ever tasted. A perfect antidote to the stale, rum-tinged water on the ship. The white meat inside is rich and fatty. A welcome change from the lean, stringy salt beef. You find a patch of what look like a type of wild yam or cassava root. You dig them up with your hands. The dirt cool and moist. These starchy roots can be roasted in a fire, a Caribbean equivalent of a baked potato. You see trees heavy with bananas, mangoes, and papayas. You gorge yourself on the sweet, juicy flesh. The vibrant flavors, a shocking contrast to the blandness of your shipboard diet. For the first time in months, your body is getting a huge, glorious dose of vitamins and sugar. But for every delicious find, there is a potential for disaster. You see a bush with bright, enticing red berries. Are they a sweet treat or a deadly poison? You see a strange-looking mushroom growing on a fallen log. Will it make a savory addition to a stew? Or will it cause you to die in agony? You have no field guide, no botanical knowledge. Your only source of information is the passed down, often unreliable folk wisdom of your fellow sailors. Never eat a fruit that the birds won't touch. One might advise, if it smells like almonds, it's death, says another, referring to the scent of cyanide in some plants. Every bite is a gamble. Here's a small, specific detail of island foraging: the heart of palm. This was considered a great delicacy. It involved cutting down an entire palm tree, a huge amount of work, to get to the tender, white core at the very top of the trunk. This heart could be eaten raw or boiled. It was a crisp, delicate vegetable, but its harvest was incredibly wasteful, sacrificing a whole tree for a single meal. This practice of wooding and watering, stopping at uninhabited islands to replenish supplies, was a standard part of any long sea voyage. The locations of these islands, especially those with reliable sources of fresh water, were jealously guarded secrets. passed from one captain to another. These islands were the vital pit stops of the age of sail. The historical study of this foraging relies heavily on the journals and logs of sailors and explorers. Captain Cook, for instance, meticulously documented the plants and animals his crew ate on their Pacific voyages. These accounts are a treasure trove for ethnobotanists, but they also contain tragic stories of crews being poisoned by eating the wrong plant. One academic debate centers on the environmental impact of these visits. Did the repeated foraging by pirates and other sailors have a lasting effect on the ecosystems of these small islands? The cutting of trees for firewood and for delicacies like heart of palm, and the hunting of local animal populations could have significantly altered the landscape over time. These pirate havens were not just a source of sustenance, they were also the sites of the first small-scale environmental pressures in these otherwise pristine ecosystems. As the sun begins to set, your shore party regroups on the beach. Your sacks are heavy with a bizarre and wonderful collection of fruits, and nuts. You have survived your game of tropical roulette. Back on the ship, a great fire is built on the beach. The yams are roasted in the embers. The fresh fruit is passed around, and for one glorious evening, you and your crew feast like kings. You are full, truly full, for the first time in memory. The scurvy in your bones seems to recede a little, beaten back by the sudden, massive influx of vitamins. You know that tomorrow you will be back on the ship, back to the hardtack and the salt horse. But tonight, under the stars on a forgotten beach, the island has given you a brief, delicious, and life-saving reprieve. The feast on the beach was a glorious, the temporary reprieve. The ship is still your home, and it is in desperate need of maintenance. Months at sea have taken their toll. The hull is sluggish, weighed down by a thick carpet of marine growth, and the wooden planks below the waterline are being slowly devoured by ship worms. The captain gives an order that makes every sailor groan it's time to careen the ship. Careening is the arduous, filthy, and back-breaking process of beaching the vessel and tipping it on its side to expose the hull for cleaning and repairs. It is the most vulnerable time in a ship's life. A pirate crew would have to find a hidden, secure cove where they were unlikely to be surprised by naval patrols. Once a suitable spot is found, the real work begins. All the cannons, barrels, ballast stones, and heavy equipment must be moved to one side of the ship. Then, using the ship's own masts, undrigging as a lever, the crew hauls on massive ropes to pull the vessel over onto its side in the shallow water. It's a delicate, dangerous operation. A snapped rope or a miscalculation could mean the ship capsizes completely. Once the ship is on its side, a large portion of its hull is exposed to the air, and you get your first good look at what you've been carrying around with you. The entire surface is a shaggy, living ecosystem of seaweed, slime, and, most importantly, barnacles. And this is where ship maintenance and dinner intersect in the most unappetizing way imaginable. The ship is low on food again. The bounty of the island has been consumed. The men are hungry. Your job is to take a scraper and begin the grueling work of chipping the barnacles off the hull. But you are not just throwing them away. The larger barnacles, especially the gooseneck barnacles, are collected in buckets. They are considered food. You look at the strange creatures in your bucket. A gooseneck barnacle has a fleshy, rubbery stalk the neck that ends in a hard, shell-like plate. They look like some kind of alien artichoke. The cook takes the buckets and boils them in a cauldron of seawater over a beach fire. When they're cooked, you are shown how to eat one. You hold the hard shell and bite off the rubbery stalk. The texture is like a tough, chewy squid, and the flavor is intensely briny, a concentrated taste of the ocean itself. It is, to put it mildly, an acquired taste. It's gritty, it's fishy, and it's strange. But it's also fresh protein, and in your desperate state, you eat it without complaint. This practice of eating barnacles was a common resort for sailors of all stripes. It was a source of food that was literally attached to your home. It's a perfect example of the extreme measures people would take to supplement their diet. But barnacles aren't the only thing you're scraping off. The hull is also home to a variety of other small shellfish and mollusks, which are also added to the pot. And then, there are the shipworms. A shipworm isn't actually a worm, it's a type of long, thin, shell-less clam that bores into wooden structures in salt water. They are the termites of the sea, and they can destroy a ship's hull over time. Part of careening is to plug these wormholes with tar and lead sheeting. Some desperate sailors' accounts even mention eating these worm-like clams, describing them as having a muddy but not unpleasant taste. Here's a small, disgusting detail about careening: the smell. The process of scraping the hull and burning off the old tar and slime with torches creates a truly apocalyptic stench. It's the smell of burnt tar, low tide, and cooking shellfish all mixed together into a thick, oily miasma that clings to the cove for days. It was said you could smell a ship being careened from miles away, which was another reason to find a very secluded spot. The historical study of careening and ship maintenance is vital to understanding the operational cycles of piracy. A ship could only stay at sea for so long before it became too slow and unseaworthy. The need to careen every few months dictated the rhythm of pirate voyages, forcing them to alternate between periods of active cruising and periods of vulnerable, laborious downtime. The academic debate often focuses on the locations of these careen ages. Pirates had their favorite spots, hidden bays and coves throughout the Caribbean and off the coast of Africa. Archaeologists search for these sites, looking for telltale signs, deposits of old tar, piles of ballast stones, and the remains of campfires. Finding a confirmed pirate careen age site is a huge prize, offering a snapshot into the mundane, domestic side of pirate life. You spend your day scraping, pulling, and hammering, your body aching from the unfamiliar labor. Your dinner is a handful of boiled barnacles. Their strange, rubbery texture, a new low in your culinary journey. You are eating the filth off the bottom of your own boat. It's a moment that perfectly captures the grim, unromantic reality of this life. There is no glory, no treasure. There is only the hard work of survival, and a meal that, just a few hours ago, was stuck to the hull. The ship is clean, the hull is patched, and you are back at sea. But the careening process has exhausted the last of your meager food supplies, including the barnacles. The crew is weak, and their morale is dangerously low. The captain knows that something must be done. He steers the ship towards another island, one marked on his secret charts, not just for its water, but for its potential as a hunting ground. A hunting party is formed, composed of the best shots and the steadiest hands on the ship. You are chosen, perhaps because of your keen eyesight or your quiet tread. You are given a musket, a powder horn, and a small bag of lead shot. This is a very different kind of shore leave. It's not about foraging for fruit, it's about hunting for meat. As you move inland, away from the beach, the experienced hunters in your group point out the signs they're looking for. They show you hoof prints in the mud, a patch of ground that has been recently rooted up, and the telltale droppings of your prey. You are hunting for pigs and goats. But these are not domestic farm animals. They are the feral descendants of livestock left on these islands by previous sailors, buccaneers, explorers, or even other pirates. Decades ago, the captain might have intentionally released a breeding pair of pigs or goats onto an island, creating a self-sustaining, living larder that he could return to on future voyages. This was a common and intelligent practice, a long-term investment in survival. Over generations, these animals have reverted to a wild state. The pigs have grown thick, bristly hair and long, dangerous tusks. The goats are weary, nimble, and incredibly wary. They are not easy prey. Your party moves in silence, communicating with hand signals. The hunt is a slow, patient, and tense affair. Your musket is a heavy, clumsy weapon. It's a smooth herber flintlock, wildly inaccurate at any significant distance. You have to get close, very close, to have any chance of hitting your target, and you only have one shot. Reloading is a slow, multi-step process that is impossible to do in a hurry. You have to make your first shot count. After an hour of tense tracking, you see them, a small sounder of wild pigs, rooting around in the undergrowth. Your party freezes. The leader signals for 2 men to circle around, to try and drive the pigs towards the rest of you. You raise your musket, your heart pounding. The metal of the barrel is hot from the sun. You wait. Suddenly, the pigs bolt. They crash through the undergrowth, not away from you, but directly towards you. A large boar, its tusks yellow and sharp, is leading the charge. It's a moment of pure, primal terror. You aim, you pull the trigger, and the musket roars to life, kicking back against your shoulder with a painful jolt. The air fills with a thick cloud of acrid, white smoke, completely obscuring your vision. When the smoke clears, you see that one of the pigs is down. Another hunter has made a successful shot. The rest of the sounder has vanished back into the jungle. The tension breaks. Your party lets out a whoop of triumph. You have meat. The process of butchering the animal is swift and professional. The sailors may be pirates, but many of them grew up on farms. They know how to dress a carcass. The pig is bled, gutted, and skinned on the spot. The meat is divided up into manageable portions to be carried back to the ship. Nothing is wasted. The offal, the heart, liver, and kidneys is considered a delicacy and will be cooked and eaten first. Here's a small, gruesome detail about hunting at sea. The dodo. While the Golden Age of Piracy occurred after the dodo went extinct around 1681, the earlier buccaneers of the 17th century, who preyed on Spanish shipping in the Indian Ocean, were some of the last humans to see and eat this famously flightless bird. The island of Mauritius, the dodo's only home, was a common stopping point. Sailors' accounts describe the dodo as being ridiculously easy to hunt, with a toughened, not particularly tasty meat. Their extinction was caused by a combination of this overhunting and the introduction of invasive species, like pigs and rats, from the very ships that stopped there. The historical understanding of pirates as hunters is an important part of re-evaluating their relationship with the environment. They weren't just takers, they were also active participants in the ecosystems they visited. The introduction of pigs and goats had a massive impact, often devastating the native flora and fauna, but it also created a new, artificial ecosystem that they could then exploit. The academic debate often questions the sustainability of this practice. Could these feral animal populations withstand the pressure of regular hunting by visiting ships on larger islands? The populations were likely resilient. On smaller islands, a single, determined hunting party could potentially wipe out the entire animal population in a few days, destroying that living water for any ships that came after them. You help carry a heavy haunch of fresh pork back towards the beach. Your shoulder is bruised from the musket's recoil, but you feel a deep sense of pride and accomplishment. You are not a farmer or a sailor today. You are a hunter. You have provided for your crew. That night, the smell of roasting pork fills the air, a scent 1,000 times more satisfying than grilled fish or boiled barnacles. It is the smell of victory, the taste of survival learned through patience, skill, and a single, well-aimed shot. The feast of wild pork was a roaring success, a greasy, satisfying memory that the crew will talk about for weeks. But now you're back at sea, and the familiar, monotonous diet has returned. There is, however, one small, lingering source of fresh food on board. It's a constant, noisy, and frankly, smelly reminder that not all of your shipmates are human. It's time to properly meet the floating farm. Tucked away in a corner of the main deck, sheltered as much as possible from the wind and spray, is a small, crudely built coop. Inside, a handful of scrawny, miserable-looking chickens are scratching around in the filth. Nearby, tethered to a railing, a single, mournful-looking nanny goat is chewing cud, her beard stained with salt spray. These animals are your last line of defense against a diet of pure preserved misery. They are not pets. They are walking, clucking, bleeding rations, and their existence on the ship is a constant struggle for survival, both for them and for the crew tasked with keeping them alive. The chickens are the most problematic. They are terrible sailors. They get seasick. They are easily stressed by the constant motion and noise of the ship, which means they often stop laying eggs. Their feed, usually a small portion of the ship's precious grain or a handful of weevils swept from the biscuit barrels, is meager. They are a constant temptation for the hungry crew. A man might try to sneak an egg from the coop when the cook isn't looking, a crime almost as serious as stealing from the main stores. The daily egg collection is a ritual. The cook will carefully check the coop, and if he finds an egg, it is treated like a piece of treasure. It might be given to a sick man, as it is one of the most nutrient-dense foods on the ship, or it might be reserved for the captain, a small perk of his command. On the rare occasion that several eggs are collected, they might be whipped up with some rum and sugar to make a sort of protein-rich eggnog for the officers. The goat is a far more valuable and resilient asset. Goats are surprisingly sure-footed on a moving deck and can subsist on a wider range of food, including vegetable peelings when they were available, spoiled biscuits, and even rope ends. The real prize is her milk. Each morning, the cook's mate will milk the goat, collecting a small but vital quantity of fresh milk. This milk is liquid gold. It might be given to the ship's boys, young apprentices whose growing bodies desperately need the calcium and fat. It might be used by the cook to make the lobscouse a little creamier and more nutritious, or it could be turned into a simple cheese or yogurt, a way to preserve the dairy for a few extra days. The health of this single goat is a matter of ship-wide concern. If she gets sick or stops producing milk, it's a genuine crisis. Here's a small, practical detail of this floating farm, where to keep them space on a ship was at an absolute premium. The cooks and pens had to be tucked away wherever they would fit, often in the waist of the ship or near the longboat. This meant the animals' work constantly underfoot, creating a mess that had to be regularly cleaned to prevent the deck from becoming a slippery, unsanitary hazard. The smell of chicken and goat droppings would permanently perfume that section of the ship. The history of livestock at sea is long and fascinating. The Spanish, on their great galleons crossing the Atlantic, were masters of it. They would dedicate significant portions of their lower decks to housing dozens of pigs, chickens, and sheep, creating a true floating farm to feed their large crews and passengers. The pirates' efforts were a much smaller, more ad hoc version of this. The academic debate often revolves around the efficiency of keeping livestock at sea. Was it worth it? An animal takes up space. It consumes food and precious fresh water. A goat might drink more water than a human. In a purely logistical sense, the amount of resources an animal consumed over a voyage might be greater than the nutritional value of the milk, eggs, or meat it provided. However, historians argue that this misses the point. The value of the livestock wasn't just in the calories, it was in the freshness. A fresh egg provided vital micronutrients that were completely absent from the preserved rations. The psychological benefit of having something, anything, fresh to eat was immeasurable for morale. The floating farm was a nutritionally inefficient but psychologically essential part of surviving a long voyage. You watch the goat as she placidly chews, her yellow eyes staring blankly at the horizon. She is a creature completely out of her natural element, a land animal forced to live on the shifting, unstable world of the sea. She is also one of the most important members of the crew. Her health is your health. Her milk is a brief, daily reminder of a fresher, more nutritious world. She is your living link to the land. It is a small, stubborn bastion against the tyranny of the barrel. The mood on the ship is at rock bottom. The brief joy of the hunting trip has faded. The goat has gone dry, and the crew is back to a grim diet of weevil wye biscuits and the dregs of the salt beef barrel. The men are weak, scurvy is rampant, and tempers are frayed. The voyage is a failure. Then, the lookout's cry electrifies the ship's sail ho. All eyes turn to the horizon. It's a merchant ship, a fat, slow-moving brigantine. Low in the water and struggling in the light wind. It's a perfect target. Suddenly, the lethargy vanishes. The captain barks orders. The pirates, transformed from listless invalids into focused predators, run to their stations. The ship is brought about, the great sail catching the wind. The chase is on. After a short pursuit and a single volley from your cannons across her bow, the merchant ship wisely surrenders without a fight. Your crew swarms aboard. Cutlass is drawn. The captured sailors are rounded up. Their faces a mixture of terror and resignation. The real prize, however, is not the crew or even the ship itself. It's what's in the hold. The captain and quartermaster take a lantern and descend into the captured ship's cargo bay. The crew waits on deck in breathless anticipation. They are not hoping for chests of gold, though that would be nice. They are praying for a different kind of treasure. The quartermaster's voice booms up from the darkness, wine and flour. A massive, joyous roar erupts from the crew. It's a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. You have hit the culinary jackpot. This is better than gold. Gold can't be eaten. The transfer of the loot begins immediately, but instead of heavy chests, you are hauling barrels of French wine, a welcome change from the watered-down grog and sour beer. You are manhandling heavy sacks of fine white flour from the American colonies, a substance of almost mythical quality compared to the coarse, weevil-infested meal used to make your hardtack. You find wheels of hard Dutch cheese, wrapped in wax, and casks of salted butter. There are barrels of dry peas, sacks of onions, and even a small crate of precious spices, nutmeg and cloves. It is a pirate's dream pantry. This single act of piracy has completely transformed your fortunes. You are no longer on the brink of starvation. You are on the brink of a feast. The captured ship's larder is a direct window into the global trade of the 18th century. The flour from Pennsylvania, the wine from Bordeaux, the cheese from Amsterdam, all brought together in the hold of one ship, now in the hands of a pirate crew in the middle of the Caribbean. You are, in a very real sense, tasting the fruits of international commerce. Here's a small, practical detail about this plunder: what to do with the original ship after stripping it of everything of value: the cargo, the sails, the ropes, the navigational instruments, and even the nails from the planks. The pirates had a choice. They could sink it, burn it, or set it adrift, ensuring it couldn't be used to raise the alarm. Or, if it was a better ship than their own, they might abandon their old vessel and simply keep the new one. A pirate captain was never sentimental about his ship. He was always on the lookout for an upgrade. The historical importance of food as plunder is a crucial, often overlooked, aspect of the pirate economy. While we focus on the silver and gold, the day-to-day reality of piracy was a constant search for supplies. The ability to replenish their larder at sea was what allowed pirate ships to stay operational for months on end, far longer than a naval vessel, which had to return to port to be re-provisioned. This reality leads to an interesting academic debate: were pirates primarily treasure hunters or provision hunters? Some historians argue that the primary motivation was always the big score, the Spanish treasure galleon. The capture of food ships was just a necessary, but secondary, part of the business. Other historians, taking a more materialist view, argue that the hunt for provisions was just as, if not more, important. A pirate crew could survive without gold, but they could not survive without food and water. In this view, piracy was as much about subsistence as it was about enrichment. The truth is that the two were inseparable. A well-fed crew was a more effective fighting force, better able to capture the treasure ships when the opportunity arose. You and your crewmates unload the last of the captured goods onto the deck of your own ship. The space is overflowing with a bounty of real, actual food. The cook is weeping with joy. The captain, for the first time in weeks, is smiling. The dark cloud of scurvy and starvation has been lifted. The future, which just this morning looked so grim, now smells deliciously of French wine and fresh flour. The ride has saved you. Tonight, for the first time in a very long time, you will eat like kings. The raid is over. The prize is secured, and an air of manic festivity has seized the ship. The lethargy and despair of the past few weeks have evaporated, replaced by the giddy energy of a crew that has just been pulled back from the brink. This is not the time for careful rationing. This is the time for a feast. The captain declares a celebration. The crew lets out a roar of approval. The ship's course is set for a lazy, downwind drift. Watches are reduced to a minimum. The main deck is cleared, and preparations for the party begin. The cook, One-Eyed Jack, is in his element. He is no longer a beleaguered survivor, but a master chef with a fully stocked pantry. He barks orders at his mates, directing the preparation of the most ambitious meal of the voyage. The centerpiece of the feast will be a sea pie. This is not a delicate, fruit-filled dessert. A sea pie is a monstrously large, savory dish, a sort of layered meat and dough casserole cooked in the ship's great cauldron. The cook and his helpers line the bottom of the pot with a thick layer of dough made from the freshly captured flour. On top of this, they place a layer of whatever meat is available, chunks of the old salt beef, made palatable by the prospect of better things to come, poultry if any was captured, and perhaps some of the fresh fish caught earlier. This is seasoned with the captured onions on precious spices. Then another layer of dough is added, followed by another layer of meat. This continues until the cauldron is full, a veritable geological stratification of dough and protein. The whole thing is topped with a thick crust of dough, and water or wine is poured in before the lid is put on. It is then left to simmer and steam for hours. While the sea pie bubbles away, the rest of the celebration gets underway. The barrels of captured French wine are broached. There is no ceremony, no careful pouring into glasses. The crew dip their tin cups, their bowls, or even their hats directly into the barrel, drinking deeply of the rich, dark liquid. The potent wine, consumed on empty stomachs, has an immediate and powerful effect. Within an hour, the deck is filled with loud, drunken singing and boasting. Men who were recently too weak to stand are now challenging each other to wrestling matches. Others gather in groups to gamble with dice, wagering the silver coins they haven't even received yet. The ship's musician, if you have one, pulls out his fiddle and scrapes out a lively, if slightly off-key, jig. The deck of the ship transforms from a place of work and misery into a chaotic, floating tavern. When the sea pie is finally ready, the cook hauls the massive cauldron to the center of the deck. The crew descends upon it like a pack of wolves, armed with their knives and plates. There is no polite serving. Men dig directly into the massive pie, scooping out steaming heaps of the rich, savory stew. You take your first bite. The dough is soft and has soaked up all the juices from the meat and wine. The meat itself is tender, and the hit of exotic spices like nutmeg and clove is a psychedelic explosion of flavor on your long-deprived palate. It is, without exaggeration, the most delicious thing you have ever eaten. You eat until your stomach, shrunken from weeks of hunger, feels like it's going to burst. You eat until you can't possibly eat another bite, and then you eat a little more. Here's a small detail about these feasts: the toast. A pirate crew would often have a series of traditional, and often darkly humorous, toasts. They might drink to a short life and a merry one, a fatalistic acceptance of their dangerous profession, or to the confusion of our enemies, a simple wish for victory. These toasts were a way of cementing their bond, a shared ritual in the midst of the chaos. The historical accuracy of these wild, unrestrained feasts is well supported by primary sources. Accounts from captured merchants or sailors who were forced to join pirate crews often describe these moments of gluttonous celebration after a successful raid. They paint a picture of a crew swinging violently between the extremes of starvation and excess. However, Some historians debate the frequency and sustainability of this feast and famine cycle. While a big score would certainly lead to a party, a smart captain and quartermaster knew that the captured provisions still had to last. Did they allow the crew to consume a huge portion of the prize in one night? Or was the feast a more controlled affair, a calculated release of pressure before return to stricter rationing? The answer probably varied greatly depending on the crew's discipline and the size of the prize. If you captured a ship laden with enough food to last for months, a single night of indulgence was a small price to pay for the massive boost in morale. The party rages on long into the night. The deck is slick with spilled wine. Men have passed out in corners, their bellies full for the first time in memory. The stars will overhead. You lie on the deck, your head spitting from the wine, your stomach aching from the sheer volume of food you've consumed. It's a feeling of pure, blissful, and profound contentment. The misery of the past few weeks seems like a bad dream. For this one night, you are not a starving sailor on the edge of the world. You are a king, and your kingdom is a steaming slice of sea pie and a bottomless cup of wine. The celebratory feast is a greasy, glorious memory. The captured food has been properly stowed, the wine barrels secured, and a semblance of order has returned to the ship. But you are not heading back out to the lonely expanse of the open ocean. The captain, buoyed by the successful raid and the improved morale of the crew, sets a course for a different kind of destination. You are heading to port. Not a respectable, Navy-controlled port, but a rowdy, lawless, and thriving pirates' sanctuary. A place like Nassau on the island of New Providence in the Bahamas, which for a brief, shining period in the early 18th century, was the capital of a de facto pirate republic. As the ship navigates the treacherous shallow channels into the harbor, you see a forest of masts, dozens of ship sloops, brigs, and schooners, all flying the black flag in open defiance, are anchored in the turquoise water. The town itself is a chaotic jumble of wooden shacks, fortified storehouses, and, most numerous of all, taverns. The air hums with activity and a palpable sense of freedom and danger. This is where you come to spend your plunder. The quartermaster calls the crew together and divides the spoils from the raid. You are given your share, a small but heavy bag of silver coins. It's the most money you have ever held in your life, and you are about to turn it back into food. You and your crewmates go ashore, your pockets jingling. Your first stop is, inevitably, the tavern. But this is different from the grim meal you had before you signed on. You are not a desperate man looking for work. You are a successful pirate with silver to spend. You order a plate of food. It's not a mystery stew. It's a thick slab of roasted pork, a meat you can identify, cooked over a proper fire. It's served with a side of fried plantains and a hunk of bread that is actually soft. You order a tankard of good, strong English ale, imported and expensive, not the sour small beer from the ship. The taste is a revelation. It's the taste of civilization, the taste of choice. These pirate ports were essential for the pirate life cycle. They were a place to recruit new crew members, to repair and refit their ships, and, most importantly, to sell their stolen goods. A whole shadow economy existed here. A pirate captain would sell his captured cargo sugar, indigo, spices to a network of shady merchants who would then smuggle the goods to respectable markets in the American colonies or Europe, laundering the stolen items for a massive profit. This is where you could buy things you could never get at sea. You might spend a few of your silver coins on a new shirt, a pair of proper leather boots, or a pouch of high-quality tobacco. But mostly, the money was spent on ephemeral pleasures, food, drink, and entertainment. The pirate's philosophy was often live for today, as tomorrow you might be at the bottom of the sea or at the end of a rope. Here's a small, telling detail about the food in these ports' barbecue. The word and the technique come from the native Taino people of the Caribbean, who cooked meat on a wooden framework called a barbaca. The early buccaneers who hunted wild cattle and pigs on the islands of Hispaniola and Tortuga adopted this slow cooking, smoky method. It was a perfect way to cook the tough, game-y meat of the feral animals they hunted. This buccaneer-style barbecue, a taste forged in the lawless wilds, became a staple food in the pirate havens. The very existence and nature of these pirate nests is a topic of great historical interest. How were they able to operate with such impunity for a time? Corrupt or weak colonial governors were willing to turn a blind eye to the pirates, or even actively support them, in exchange for a share of their profits and a source of defense against rival powers like Spain. However, the academic debate often centers on how much of a republic a place like Nassau really was. Some historians, like Marcus Rediker, argue that these pirate communities were radical, democratic, and egalitarian societies, a direct challenge to the oppressive, monarchical order of the day. They see the pirate code as a genuine social contract and the pirate haven as a liberated zone. Other historians are more skeptical, viewing these ports as simply chaotic, violent, and temporary agglomerations of criminals driven by greed, not ideology. They argue that the Republic was less a political project and more a convenient anarchy that was doomed to fail as soon as the major naval powers decided to shut it down, which they eventually did, with force. You spend a few days in this whirlwind of consumption. You eat and drink until you are sick of it. You spend your silver with reckless abandon. But soon, the money runs out. Your bag of coins is empty. The tavern owner who was your best friend yesterday is now giving you a hard stare. The port, which seemed so welcoming, now feels predatory. It's time to go. You walk back to the ship, your head aching and your pockets empty. You have successfully converted your hard-won plunder into a few good meals and a massive hangover. You have traded a future of potential security for a few days of present pleasure. It is the pirate's bargain. Then now, the only way to earn your next good meal is to head back out to sea and do it all over again. You're back at sea, the drunken haze of the pirate port a fading memory. The hold is restocked with the familiar barrels of hardtack and salt horse. The cycle of misery has begun anew. The crew settles back into the monotonous shipboard routine, and with it, the unwritten rules of shipboard life reassert themselves. This includes the complex and deeply unsanitary code of conducts surrounding mealtime. It's time to learn your table manners. There are no individual plates for many meals. The cook will prepare the day's main course, the lumpy grayish lobscouse in the great cauldron. The crew is divided into small groups of 6 or 8 men, called messes. Each mess is given a single, large wooden bowl or platter, filled with their collective share of the stew. You and your messmates gather around your communal bowl. There are no forks. The fork was still a relatively new and somewhat effete invention, not common among lower-class sailors. You have 2 tools for eating: a simple wooden or pewter spoon, and your personal knife. The first rule of the mess is simple: keep your hands out of the bowl. To use your fingers to grab a piece of meat would be a major breach of etiquette, a sign that you are no better than an animal. It's a rule of basic hygiene, however flawed, in a world where hands are rarely washed. The second rule is about pacing. You cannot simply dive and uneat as fast as you can. A man who wolfed down his food would be seen as greedy, trying to get more than his fair share before others had a chance. The unspoken rule was to eat slowly and deliberately, taking turns dipping your spoon into the bowl. It was a forced and fragile civility, designed to ensure everyone got a roughly equal amount. The third, and most important, rule concerns your knife, your personal knife, which you use for everything from cutting ropes to cleaning your fingernails, is also your primary eating utensil for solid food. When a chunk of salt meat is in the bowl, you are expected to use your knife to spear it, but there is a strict protocol. You must stab the meat cleanly and bring it directly to your mouth or your personal biscuit. You are not allowed to use your knife to stir the stew or to fish around for better pieces. And most critically, after taking your piece, You are expected to wipe the blade clean on your biscuit or a piece of cloth before putting it away. Leaving your saliva-covered knife lying around was a major faux pas. These rules were not just about politeness. They were a crucial mechanism for maintaining peace in a crowded, high-stress environment, with food being such a precious and often scarce resource. Any perceived unfairness at mealtime could quickly escalate into a violent confrontation. A man who felt cheated out of his fair share of the meat might challenge the offender to a duel on the next shore. The rigid etiquette of the mess was a way to impose order and prevent these conflicts from erupting. Here's a small, curious detail about mealtime traditions: the passing of the scuttlebutt. While the communal bowl enforced a certain order, drinking was often a more chaotic affair. A single cup or ladle, the butt, would be used to scoop grog or beer from the barrel. The scuttle, this cup would be passed from man to man. The unspoken rule was to drink your share quickly and pass it on. A man who held onto the cup for too long, trying to get a second sip, would be met with angry glares and shouted insults. The historical study of sailors' mess life provides a fascinating window into the social dynamics of the lower deck. Naval records, sailors' memoirs, and even court-martial records for fights that broke out during meals all help historians piece together this lost world of shipboard etiquette. One academic debate is whether pirate messes were or are less egalitarian than those in the Royal Navy. In the Navy, the mess system was strictly enforced, a two-love discipline from the top down. But on a pirate ship, with its democratic ethos, was the etiquette more relaxed? Some scholars argue that the pirates, having rejected naval tyranny, might have had a more informal approach. However, others contend that because the pirates were a self-governing body, the need for a strong, mutually agreed-upon code of conduct was even more critical. Since there was no captain of Marines to enforce order, the crew had to police themselves. This could mean that the social pressure to conform to the rules of the mess was even more intense on a pirate ship. You take your turn, spearing a stringy piece of salt beef from the communal bowl. You carefully bring it to your mouth, chew it thoughtfully, and then wipe your knife clean on the edge of your hardtack. You are participating in a ritual that is both deeply civilized and profoundly unsanitary. You are sharing food and germs in equal measure with the men around you. It is the strange, contradictory dance of life at sea, a constant effort to maintain a fragile bubble of human order in a world of overwhelming chaos. You huddle with your messmates around the communal bowl, diligently following the unwritten rules of mealtime etiquette. As you choke down your meager share of the salty stew, you can't help but glance towards the stern of the ship. There, on the raised quarterdeck, the captain is taking his meal. This inevitably leads to a question that every crewman silently asks himself: is he eating better than we are? The answer is, like most things in the pirate world, complicated. Yes, the captain enjoyed certain privileges, but the concept of the captain's table as a place of fine dining, separate from the suffering of the crew, was more a feature of the Royal Navy and merchant vessels than of a pirate ship. On a naval warship, the class divide was a chasm. While the ratings on the lower decks were eating weevil-wide biscuits and salt horse, the officers in the wardroom would be dining on the best provisions the ship had to offer. The captain would have his own private stock of live animals, his own private garden in boxes on the stern castle, and his own cook to prepare his meals. He would dine with his officers on porcelain plates, with silver cutlery and fine wine, completely insulated from the culinary misery of the common sailor. This was a source of immense resentment and a major contributing factor to mutiny. On a pirate ship, however, the ethos was fundamentally different. The pirate code you signed explicitly guaranteed equal shares to fresh victuals. This meant, in theory, that the captain was entitled to the exact same daily ration as the lowest cabin boy. He ate the same hardtack, the same salt beef, and drank the same watered-down grog. This was a radical departure from the established maritime order, and it was a powerful statement of egalitarian principle. The captain was not a gentleman officer, he was the elected leader of a company of thieves, and his authority depended on maintaining the consent of the governed. If he were seen to be hoarding the best food for himself while the crew was suffering, he would quickly face a mutiny, led by the quartermaster, who was the crew's watchdog in these matters. However, theory and practice are two different things. While the captain's daily ration was the same, he did enjoy certain unspoken perks. When a prize was taken, the captain often had the first pick of the plunder. This usually applied to valuable objects, but could also extend to the captured food. If a captured ship had a single cask of fine Madeira wine or a wheel of prized Parmesan cheese, the captain might claim it as his own. This was generally accepted by the crew as a reasonable privilege of command, as long as it wasn't excessive. The captain also had the benefit of a private space. He had his own cabin, which meant he could take his meal in relative peace, away from the jostling, communal mess of the main deck. The cook might also take a little extra care with the captain's portion, perhaps finding a slightly less tough piece of bee for frying his biscuit in the precious slush from the grease barrel. These were small, subtle advantages that on a long and miserable voyage, they made a difference. Here's a small, telling detail about the captain's provisions: alcohol. All the crew drank beer and grog. The captain often had his own private stock of better quality liquor, like brandy or bottled wine. This was less about nutrition and more about status. Offering a glass of good brandy to a captured merchant captain or a visiting official was a way of performing his role as a commander. It was part of the theater of captaincy. The historical debate over the pirate captain's diet is a nuanced one. Most historians agree that the Stark class-based dietary divide of the Navy did not exist on pirate ships. The principle of equal rations was largely respected. However, they also acknowledged that a successful and charismatic captain, like a Blackbird or a Bartholomew Black Bart Roberts, likely enjoyed a standard of living and a quality of food that was incrementally, but significantly, better than that of his crew. The debate often focuses on the source of the captain's authority. Was it derived purely from the democratic consent of the crew as laid out in the articles, or did it also rely on a more traditional, charismatic form of leadership, where the captain's natural authority and success in battle earned him privileges that went beyond the written code? The reality was likely a constant negotiation between these two models. A captain who was successful and brought in a lot of plunder could get away with a few extra perks. A captain on a long, unsuccessful voyage who was seen to be living better than his starving crew was a captain who was about to be voted out of a job. Or worse, you watch your captain as he finishes his meal. He's eating alone, but he's eating the same slop as you. His posture is a little straighter. His plate might be a little cleaner, but the food is the same. It's a powerful symbol. He is not a lord in a floating castle. He is first among equals, a leader who shares in the hardships of his men. And in this world of profound discomfort, that shared misery is the glue that holds your violent, fragile democracy together. Life at sea is governed by routine, the changing of the watch, the daily rationing, the endless cycle of work and boredom. But this monotony is occasionally punctuated by bizarre, violent, and deeply strange rituals, many of which revolve around food and drink. You are about to witness one of the most infamous of these traditions, a ceremony that is part theater, part hazing, and part pure, terrifying chaos. Your ship is about to cross the equator. As you approach the imaginary line that separates the northern and southern hemispheres, a change comes over the crew. A strange, festive, and slightly menacing energy begins to build. The old salts, the men who have made this crossing before, start whispering to the polywest, the greenhorns like you who have never crossed the line. They tell wild stories of the ordeal to come, of the tribute that must be paid to the god of the sea. On the day of the crossing, the ceremony begins. A figure appears on the forecastle, a man dressed in a grotesque and spectacular costume. He is King Neptune, the ruler of the deep. His beard is made from frayed rope ends, his crown is a tin pot, and his royal robes are a tattered old canvas sail. He is flanked by his queen, Amphitrite, who is usually the ugliest, burliest sailor on the ship, dressed in a stolen dress and a ridiculous wig. They are accompanied by a royal court of tritons and other sea monsters, all sailors in bizarre, cobbled together costumes. King Neptune addresses the ship. His voice, a booming parody of royal authority. He declares that all the polywes, the slimy, uninitiated landlubbers, must be brought before him to be cleansed of their northern grime and transformed into trusty shellbacks, true sons of the sea. What follows is a brutal and humiliating series of trials. One by one, the polywes are dragged before the royal court. The first stop is the royal barber. The barber's shaving cream is a foul mixture of slush from the grease barrel, tar, and flour. His razor is a rusty, oversized piece of barrel hoop. He lathers your face with the stinking concoction and proceeds to shave you with his blunt, rusty blade, scraping and scratching your skin. Next, you might be forced to swallow a pill prescribed by the royal doctor, a disgusting mouthful of some concocted horror from the cook's galley, forced down your throat with a swig of seawater. The culmination of the ordeal is the baptism. You are thrown backwards into a large tub of stagnant, filthy seawater, and held under until you are sputtering unchoking. As you emerge, gasping for air, King Neptune strikes you on the shoulder with a wooden cutlass and declares you a shellback. You have survived. You are now one of them. This ceremony, in various forms, has been a tradition for sailors for centuries and continues in some navies to this day. Its origins are obscure, but it served a very real social purpose. It was a rite of passage, a way to build camaraderie and relieve the crushing boredom of a long voyage. It was a moment of world upside down, where the normal shipboard hierarchy was temporarily suspended and chaos was allowed to reign. Of course, the food and drink aspect of these rituals was central. The royal feast that might follow the ceremony was often a parody of a real meal, involving the consumption of bizarre and unpleasant things. The forced drinking of grog, or even pure seawater, was a common part of the hazing. Here's a small, weird detail about another food-related ritual tapping the admiral. This was a ghoulish piece of naval folklore. The story goes that after Admiral Nelson was killed at the Battle of Trafalgar, his body was preserved in a cask of brandy to be transported back to England. Upon arrival, the cask was opened, and it was discovered that the sailors had drilled a small hole in the bottom of the cask and had been secretly drinking the brandy that had pickled their heroic admiral's body. Tapping the admiral thus became a slang term for illicitly siphoning liquor from a cask. The historical study of these maritime rituals is a rich field for social historians and folklorists. They analyze how these traditions helped sailors cope with the extreme psychological pressures of their environment. The crossing the line ceremony, while seemingly just brutal hazing, was also a powerful bonding experience. By enduring the same humiliation, the crew, from the newest polyway to the saltiest shellback, reinforced their shared identity as a community apart from the land-based world. However, there is an academic debate about the level of violence involved. Some accounts describe the ceremony as a good-natured, if rough, piece of fun. Others describe it as a truly sadistic and dangerous ordeal, where men were seriously injured or even killed. The reality likely depended on the mood of the crew and the cruelty of the Neptune in charge. On a pirate ship, with its inherent culture of violence, the line between ritual hazing and doubt, right assault could be dangerously thin. You lie on the deck, your face sore from the shave, your stomach churning from the pill, and your clothes soaked with filthy water. But you are a shellback. You have passed the test. You are no longer an outsider. You have been accepted into the strange, brutal, and exclusive brotherhood of the deep ocean. Your initiation sealed with a taste of grease and a long FUL of seawater. The chaotic joy of the line crossing ceremony is a distant memory. Your ship has been at sea for an impossibly long time. You have been becalmed for weeks, the sails hanging limp in the oppressive, humid air. The last prize you took is a ghost on the horizon of your memory. The hold, which once seemed so bountiful, is now an echoing, empty cavern. You are at the bottom of the barrel. Literally. The quartermaster makes a grim announcement to the assembled crew. His voice is flat, devoid of emotion. The last of the beef is gone. The last of the beer was served yesterday. And this, he says, holding up a single, pathetic-looking ship's biscuit, riddled with weevil holes, is the last of the bread. A dead silence falls over the ship. It's a silence more profound and more terrifying than the roar of any storm. This is the moment every sailor fears, the ultimate nightmare of the age of sail. The food has run out. The careful rationing, the reduced portions, the constant, gnawing hunger of the past few weeks now seems like a time of plenty. That was mere hunger. This is the beginning of true starvation. The ship's discipline, already frayed, begins to completely disintegrate. The authority of the captain and the quartermaster evaporates. The articles you signed are now just a meaningless piece of parchment. The only law is the desperate, primal instinct for survival. The crew's first, desperate act is a frantic hunt for any remaining scrap of food. The floating farm has long since been consumed. The last chicken was eaten weeks ago. The goat was devoured shortly after. Now, the hunt turns to the ship's vermin. The crew organizes systematic, obsessive rat hunts, stalking the lower decks and the hold, their eyes wild with hunger. Any rat caught is a prize, quickly skinned and roasted over a tiny, tearfully guarded fire. When the rats are gone, they turn to the inedible. They begin to chew on leather-old shoes, belts, the straps from the rigging. They boil the leather for hours, trying to soften it into a digestible, gelatinous pulp. It provides almost no nutritional value, but it gives their jaws something to do in their stomachs, something to fill the void. The social structure of the crew collapses. The messes are disbanded. It is every man for himself. A man who is too weak is a liability. His meager water ration might be stolen. He might be pushed overboard in the dead of night. The camaraderie of the mess bowl is replaced by the savage paranoia of the starving pack. This is the point where the veneer of civilization is stripped away entirely, and the most terrible taboo of all rears its head. It is never spoken of directly, but it hangs in the air. In the way, the stronger men begin to look at the weaker ones. It is the custom of the sea. If a ship was lost, with no hope of rescue, and the crew was starving to death in a longboat, a terrible lottery would be held. The men would draw lots, usually straws of different lengths. The man who drew the short straw was killed, and his body was used as food by the others to prolong their survival. It was a horrific, but grimly logical, last resort, a practice that existed in the darkest corners of the maritime world. Here's a small, chilling historical detail. The case of the English ship the Magnanti in 1880 brought this custom of the sea into the public eye. For men were asked to drift in a lifeboat. After weeks of starvation, they killed and ate the youngest among them, the cabin boy. They were eventually rescued, but upon their return to England, they were put on trial for murder. The case sparked a massive public debate about necessity as a defense for murder. It was a moment when the brutal, unwritten laws of the sea clashed head-on with the established laws of the land. The historical study of starvation and survival cannibalism at sea is a dark and fascinating field. Historians and archaeologists examine the logs of whaling ships trapped in the Arctic ice, the accounts of shipwreck survivors, and the forensic evidence from recovered remains. They try to understand the psychological toll of these extreme situations and the social dynamics of who lived and who died. One academic debate is how widespread the custom of the sea actually was. Was it a common, if unspoken, practice, the accepted last resort for any starving crew, or was it an exceptionally rare event, a line that was crossed only in the most extreme and hopeless of circumstances? The lack of official records makes it impossible to know for sure. It was a practice that lived in the shadows, a horror that survivors were often reluctant to speak about. You lie on the deck, your body a frail, skeletal frame, your tongue is swollen from thirst, and your stomach is a hollow, agonizing void. The sun beats down mercilessly. You look at the faces of your crewmates, and you no longer see the men you knew. You see gaunt, hollow-eyed strangers, their humanity burned away by hunger. You close your eyes and wait for the end, wondering if it will come from thirst, from the sun, or from the desperate knife of a fellow sailor. This is the ultimate reality of the pirate diet, not just bad food, but the terrifying prospect of no food at all, and the monstrous choices that follow. You are drifting, not on the merciless, sun-beaten ocean, but in a strange, hazy twilight between memory and dream. The agony of starvation, the rough texture of the sun-bleached deck beneath your back, it all begins to fade. A strange peace settles over you. You are on your final voyage now. You find yourself in a place that feels familiar, yet impossibly distant. You are sitting in that first tavern, the one in Nassau. The air is thick with the same smells of smoke and spilled rum, but the noise is gone. There is a quiet calm. A plate is set before you. It's your last supper. It's not a grand feast. It's not the greasy stew you ate on your first night, nor the glorious sea pie from the captured prize. It is simple, perfect, and impossibly beautiful. On the plate is a single, thick slice of fresh, warm bread. Its crust is golden and crisp, its inside soft and white and steaming. Next to it is a pot of sweet, creamy butter, slowly melting into the warm bread, and beside that is a glass of cool, clear, fresh water. You take a bite of the bread. The taste is overwhelming. It's the taste of the land, of wheat fields and sunshine. It's the taste of everything you lost, everything you craved during those long months at sea. The simple, honest flavor of well-baked bread is more satisfying than any treasure, more profound than any adventure. You drink the water. It's clean and pure, with no hint of slime or the sea. It washes away the perpetual saltness that has stained your soul. As you eat, you look back on the culinary journey of your life. It was a parade of horriblesse, a masterclass in misery. You think of the endless, jarring crunch of the hardtack, a sound that will echo in your memory forever. You recall the fibrous, chewy texture of the salt horse, a substance that fought you every step of the way. You can almost taste the foul, swampy water from the barrel, and the equally foul tang of scurvy in your own mouth. You remember the brief, shining moments of relief, the shocking sweetness of a fresh mango on a deserted island, the smoky, savory flavor of roasted pork after a successful hunt, the rich, wine-soaked dough of the celebratory sea pie. These moments were so powerful precisely because they were so rare. Small islands of pleasure in a vast ocean of deprivation. Your life at sea was defined by food, or the lack of it, in a way that a land dweller could never understand. The entire structure of your society, the pirate code, the role of the quartermaster, the very rhythm of your voyages, it all revolved around the stomach. The hunt for plunder was, at its core, a hunt for a decent meal. The freedom you sought was, in many ways, freedom from the tyranny of the naval purser and his rotten beef. Here's one final, small detail about the pirate's diet at the end. When a pirate was finally captured and sentenced to hang, he was traditionally granted a last meal. What did they ask for? The records are sparse, but the requests were likely for the simplest of things, not for a grand feast, but for a taste of home, a plate of fresh-cooked eggs, a piece of their mother's bread, a final, decent meal to wash away the memory of 1,000 terrible ones. The great academic question that has followed you on this journey is, why was the food so bad? The answer is simple and complex. It was a problem of technology. In an age before refrigeration, before canning, before the science of vitamins was understood, there was simply no other way to preserve enough food to sustain a crew for months at sea. The salt horse and the hardtack were not a punishment, they were a miracle of ingenuity. the only solution to an impossible problem. And yet, the pirate's story is also one of resistance to that reality. Their willingness to risk their lives to capture a ship laden with flour and wine was a rebellion against the tyranny of the barrel. Their feasts were a brief, glorious declaration that they were more than just survivors. They were men who still craved joy, flavor, and the simple pleasure of a full belly. You take the last bite of your bread. The tavern around you begins to fade. The soft, warm light dissolves into a gentle, peaceful darkness. The memories of hunger and hardship are gone. All that remains is the simple, perfect taste of fresh bread and clean water. Your long, hungry voyage is finally over. You are at peace. The world around you begins to soften. The sharp edges of memory, the taste of salt, the ache of hunger, they all start to blur, blending into one another like watercolors on a damp page. The sounds of the tavern, the distant lapping of the harbor water, all fade into a gentle, rhythmic hum, like the soft whirring of the fan in your room. You feel yourself drifting now, no longer a sailor at a lonely table, but a traveler on a much quieter sea. The hard wooden bench you've sat on for a lifetime feels impossibly soft, impossibly comfortable. The stale air of the tavern is gone, replaced by the clean, cool air of your own familiar space. You are no longer in that time, that place of desperate survival. You are returning, slowly, gently, to the here and now. The journey is over. The stories have been told. The seas are calm. The galley is dark. And the entire ship is finally, deeply asleep. Let the current of your breath guide you now. Each gentle rise and fall wave carrying you further into the peaceful depths of slumber. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to see. There is only rest. The end of the article. Good night.